Wrong TED Talk. Wrong TEDx Talk. Because let me tell you, if that's your aspiration, then you will not be part of the mobilization that we need here in Africa. It takes advantage of this demographic bubble coming through with youth to change the world we're going to have in the future. If we go out and aspirationally want to start solving things for ourselves, becoming billionaires and millionaires in our own right, we're not going to make it as a country. We're not going to make it as a continent. So what am I going to talk about? I'm talking about the financial advice that you need, but you're probably not going to get unless we create a revolution. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a revolution. If I can get the thing to work. There it is. There. So how do we rethink this thing? So maybe a little bit of background helps. I'm actually a developmental anthropologist. I said, it was said that I'd spent 40 years in finance, but in my heart of hearts, I'm a developmental anthropologist. And what exactly is that? Well, we don't do this. We don't look at evolution. We don't dig up bones. We don't do that kind of thing. What we do is that we look at societies and say, how does societal values form? How do they change over time? What influences those changes? And most importantly, what could we do to to refer to an earlier speaker, nudge that thinking in terms of values creation so we don't take each other out and blow up the planet that we're living in. So that's what a developmental anthropologist is thinking about. It's thinking about how values connect with change. And I really am not, as you might have guessed, somebody who spent their whole life being a developmental anthropologist. I ended up trying to get to Africa, trying to do work on migration and immigration, and ending up, of all things, in the Caribbean. So I'm a developmental anthropologist who went walkabout. And where did I go? How did I get from there back to Africa? Well, I followed a man. And I followed a man to Japan. And it's a dirty little secret, guys, but that's how women's careers are often formed. You follow the guy, they'll take you to some totally random place that has nothing to do with what you're aspiring to do. But in my case, it changed my life. And what I discovered is that if you are critical enough about an industry, and you're convincing enough about how really abominable that industry is, I mean, for me it was financial services, somebody might just hire you to try to straighten it out. I've got to give a hand to the Japanese. I worked there for 10 years, and they sent me all over the world to learn about financial systems and what was working and what wasn't working. And that was an incredible start to a 40-year career in that services. So we talk about financial service people as professionals, but is it really a profession? Because a profession is supposed to be someone who partners with you and says, I have the knowledge, you haven't had that opportunity to learn these things, I'm going to partner with you, like a doctor does, and I'm going to use my expertise to help make you well, financially well in this case. But in fact, what people like Cabot-Alletzhauser are able to deduce, financial services tends to be far more extractive economics than it is contributing to societal growth. Now, why do I go into this? Because if we go back and ask the question, how has first world financial thinking really impacted probably the place where it came from, which is the US? And this really incorporates the 40 years that I spent in the industry being a development anthropologist looking at the industry. You come away with some shocking insights. And the shocking insight is this, that over those 40 years, two things happened to the US. One, a country that was known for being a democracy democracy where meritocracy worked, where you could go in and simply become a millionaire just by working hard, suddenly became one of the most unequal societies, certainly in the developed economies. But more importantly, what happened in the US is and this is a phenomenon that happens with countries that become more and more affluent. The more affluent you become, the more individualistic. It's all about me. It's all about taking care of me. And when that happens, societies break down. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing one of the most polarized societies on the planet in the US right now. So why am I telling you this? And why should you care as Africa? You should care because that map that you're looking at right now, the darker the color, the more inequality. Now, you'll see at the bottom of Africa is South Africa. We know South Africa is an unequal country. We know they have it. And we say to ourselves, oh, well, that's because of apartheid. That's because of colonialism. That's because of neo-colonialism. But watch really carefully, because there's something creeping up that continent that we have to keep our eye on. And that is that South Africa also happens to be a financial center on the par of the most developed economies on the planet. So we have a financial services system that is excellent, that we should be proud of, or should we? Because where South Africa goes, and this is the alarm for the rest of Africa, so goes the rest of Africa. Namibia, Kenya, whatever, they're all copying what we're doing. And what is that leading to? Well, in South Africa, the banking sector alone accounts for 80% of the GDP. But more importantly, there's some sort of insidious things that are happening there, where the government has outsourced social protection, social security, to the private sector. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Except for this is what has made the financial sector probably the wealthiest sector in the whole country. And you have a situation where people who work in that sector earn 70 times what an average worker will work. So what happens when financialization takes over? Financialization takes over, and the whole notion of labor creating productive goods starts to fall apart. The problem with finance is that people are making money out of your money, not by creating wonderful goods and other services, but money out of your money. It's called rentier society, and it's what creates and exacerbates inequality. So these are the things that we have to concern ourselves with. And the real problem that we have is that so many countries in Africa are doing the same thing in terms of outsourcing their social security to the private sector. Why? Because they don't have the fiscus to be able to support it. Now that would be fine if it weren't for the fact that we have a government that's not only failing in terms of your income protections, and you can't earn income in retirement, but it's also failing in education, health, security, housing, the whole kit and caboodle. So, what is it that Africans, and particularly South Africans, need to start thinking about in terms of what they demand of financial services? What is it that they really need? The fascinating thing here is that I would have thought that most youth in South Africa would have been very anti-financial services industry. And they would have seen through the extractive element. But the reality is, everybody wants a piece of the action. Everybody wants an aspirational future. What I found absolutely fascinating, though, is that when I asked students, what do you want from the financial services industry? They said, I want a GPS. I'm on a navigation system. I want to learn how to get from point A to point B. Can you teach me that? And I said, well, what's point A and what's point B? Point A is I live in a home with all my brothers and sisters. I live in an extended family. I pay black tax because we all take turns to educate and then go out into the workforce, and then the next person comes in the family and takes over. How do I get from that environment where I have to constantly look after my family to a point where here's Will Smith over here, wanting to be a billionaire? I want my own place. I deserve my own place, don't I? How do I get there? How do I actually navigate the system? Now you tell me, who sits there and gives that kind of financial advice? Who helps people understand how to work the system? Certainly not the financial services system. Interesting fact, if you go back and read a fascinating book called Hillbilly Elegy, which is all about poverty in the US, particularly West Virginia, hillbillies. J.D. Vance, he talks about how he got out of absolute abject poverty. How does he do it? He got it by joining the army. Not because the army told him how to behave himself and listen to orders, but because the very first time he got an income check, his sergeant in the army turned to him and said, hey boy, what are you going to do with that check? And of course, like any 22-year-old, he said, I'm going to buy a car. He said, wait a minute, boy. I got thrown out of the U.S. and I probably imitated West Virginia accent, but anyway. Wait a minute, boy. Have you got a family? Okay, you've got a family, you've got kids. How are you going to take care of those kids? How are you going to go and find the car that you can afford, given these other blends of responsibility you have? So what is it that J.D. Vance talked about that got him out of poverty? He learned through the army how to navigate the system such that when he had that income check in his hand, he could figure out how to go and balance the requirements of his family as well as his own personal needs to gain an asset. Now, that makes sense for the army because you don't want people going off to war and leaving families behind that are not able to support themselves. So the army would educate the entire family about financial concerns. And it was a fantastic system, and is still today, believe it or not. So that's the first thing that we can think about. Financial advice as a navigation tool for the system. But the second thing comes out of some work that Senator Nathan did on scarcity. He said, we all travel through life with a suitcase, and that suitcase may be different sizes for different people. But that suitcase is everything we need to equip ourselves to go through life, whether it be money, or resources, or family, or whatever. The problem is, for everything I put into that suitcase, if my suitcase is only that big, I'll have to leave something out. So the other big issue that financial advice needs to address is what's the trade-off? What do I put into the suitcase? What do I leave out in order to survive? How many financial institutions have you ever met that said to you, by the way, if you're going to buy that unit trust, don't buy the life insurance over here, right? No, doesn't happen, doesn't happen. So, what I'm going to show you, and this is a very important diamond that we're looking at here. I'm going to show you on this side here what you need. And then I'm going to show you over here why you're probably never going to get it, unless we have that revolution. So, up here, you need the navigation system. You don't look in the right direction. You need the navigation system. Why aren't you going to get it? Because who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay to have somebody sit by your side and tell you how to steer around the block to get that car you want? They don't care about that. They want you to buy that life policy, or they want you to put that money in for savings. How do people in financial services make money? They make money out of your money. So if you don't give the money, they don't make the money. The problem that we have is that we're living in a world where getting out of debt is often the starting point. So who's going to take the time to get you out of debt first so that you can actually get onto the road to wealth, ultimately? Because your assets make money for them, a minimum is required. Understanding what to buy is what they focus on. Save, save, save for retirement is what you hear. Why? Because that means they don't have to do anything. Remember, they have taken over the government's role of creating income protection. 15% of your income goes automatically, or 10 to 15%, into a savings bucket for the future. You don't get to touch that. Now, why is that an important problem for Africa? Why is it an important problem for South Africa? Because we're looking at a country in which the majority population has not been able to have access to multi-generational wealth transfer for generation after generation after generation. So how do we jumpstart a country when we haven't even got basic housing cover for so many families? What we need to then do is to recognize we've got to have a system that also understands that financial education fails. In fact, all the meta-analysis that's been done on financial education says it doesn't even move the dial, maybe 0.01%. So if we know that financial education fails, what can we do? Well, what we have learned is that if you work with somebody at the exact moment when they have a financial crisis or when they have something that they need to do, it's just in time, it's teachable moments, and it's 24/7 that's required. You get the picture? We need something that's ongoing, that holds your hand, that's right there with you the whole way through. So let me get to the point about whether this would be done, because the industry's over here just simply giving you once-a-year feedback, and here's the performance of your funds, and that's how much money you have. It doesn't help you at all. It doesn't address any of the issues. And why do I care that you learn financial stability? Because let's go back to the beginning and ask the question. Why is it not in the interest of Africa for you to become millionaires, billionaires, whatever? We look at a country and a continent that is riddled with corruption, that is riddled with all sorts of demographic problems. The only thing that's going to be able to change things is political will. How do you get the right politicians into the space to create the right political will? Guess what? The answer is. And what the development anthropologist will tell you is that it is a stable middle class that changes the world. Not a dynamic leader, a stable middle class. And that's what we're trying to develop into. Can it be done? It's been done. It's been done in Singapore. Started 75 years ago, had absolutely no idea what its future was going to look like financially, but was able to convert, just like Costa Rica did, a country that had nothing, into a global power. Totally heterogeneous, unlike Costa Rica, but very much like South Africa. And it did so by saying, I'm going to take 40% of your income, not 15%. I'm going to put it into a central provident fund, and I'm going to let you learn how to determine what your priorities should be for your family, not you as an individual, but what your lens of responsibility is for your family. That is going to be the key. So it's working across generations because it knows that the population it's working at didn't have that historic, multi-generational asset transfer. It also knew it could not become a grant-driven economy. It didn't have the fiscus to become a South Africa does not have the fiscus to become a grant-driven economy. We have to learn how to become responsible financially. And the best starting point, not your retirement savings, it's your housing. So if it's your housing, then if I'm taking 40%, which is what Singapore does, which sounds outrageous and would never get past our unions here, but then they said to you, you can determine what you want to do with it. Housing, education, health, whatever, some combination of the above. You determine what you want. Do you understand that the important point here is also that I'll be there as a government helping you. I'll be there to teach you how to do housing. Because housing, by the way, rent, build, buy, who tells you the answer there? Nobody. So how can we do that in South Africa? And remember, South Africa is permeating the continent. We actually already have the door open, but we haven't paid attention to this. Because we're all up in arms about this whole issue of this two-pot system, where you put part of your money now in retirement and the other part in emergency savings. The industry is absolutely up in arms that you can take all the money out and mess everything up for them. But this is just a starting point. And it actually is based on some of the work we did 10 years ago, saying to the regulators, you've got to allow South Africans to learn how to start taking responsibility and access to low-cost solutions that meet their basic needs. Housing, health, education, whatever extra you need, multi-generational. So what could you do? Well, your starting point is to say the minute you get that income check, you're part of the formal sector. And mind you, I'm only talking about the formal sector here to make this work. The minute you do that, put a financial advisor in there that's required to be able to talk to you. So who's paying for this? Remember that problem? Your fund is paying for it. Your employer is paying for it. Any of the above, make government pay for it. But it becomes part of this thing if I then add a whole bunch of other pots in here, and I make the cost of those pots significantly lower, then here's what our modeling showed. And this is exactly what we did 10 years ago in terms of modeling. It showed that actually, to solve for all of these things in your life, your housing, your education, your health, all of these things for an average worker, I would have to consume 80% of my income to solve for these things. But in this kind of a structure, it only requires 40% of my income. So it's a starting point, guys. And what it does and what we're working is trying to shift the entire industry into the notion that this can be done. Will the big boys do it? Will the industry players do it? Probably not. It's not in their financial interest to do it. You know, your problem is they've already got a lot invested. You've got to remember these big financial service companies are factories, so you've got to process it. You're asking them to go from a petrol-based engine into electric. But we can change it. And this is where the machine comes in. And I know innovation is going to be boring in a couple of minutes, but this is where we as a